It's the dawn of another new year. Africa strides into 2025, brimming with promises and wary of challenges. Latest growth projections paint a cautiously optimistic picture. South Africa's G20 presidency appears to push Africa's fate in its own hands. But uncertainties also linger, from food security to political instability and the future of AGOA. This week on the program, we look at what lies ahead for Africa in 2025, the opportunities, the challenges, and the strategic decisions that will shape the continent's journey. I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. And we have a lot to unpack, so let's now bring in our panel of experts. Joining me in Nairobi, Dr. 𝐤𝐤 𝐀𝐟𝐫, international relations expert. In Yaoundé via Zoom, David Otto Endele, Director, Geneva Center for Africa Security and Strategic Studies. And in Toronto, also via Zoom, 𝐓𝐚𝐥𝐤 𝐀𝐟𝐫, Policy Analyst at Development Reimagined. Gentlemen, a very warm welcome to you all. I want to first get a start by looking at the specific events to look out for in 2025. David, what issues are likely to chart the path for Africa in 2025?
Well, I think from a security point of view, I think, what we are likely to experience is, of course, a continuous, push towards peaceful settlement of the conflict between the Sudanese armed forces and the rapid support forces, specifically in Sudan. That is a major, crisis within the African continent that, affects a lot of regional and fragile states. So I think, the geopolitical tensions, again, that exist between the states in the Sahel. I'm talking about the likes of Mali, Burkina Faso, and Niger, which, threatens the unity of ECOWAS, which is the West African regional bloc. That is an area that one needs to also watch very closely. From a democratic point of view, Beatrice, I think we have seen a huge increase in what I call the death of democracy in some of the African countries that I mentioned earlier on, where coup d'etats were the order of the day. A clear indication that Africa still needs to find a system of governance that reflects the continent's own unique dynamics, a system of governance that reflects the youthful population, a population that accounts for over 75% of the entire continent of 54 countries. It's a very, huge number. So I'm looking, and I believe so many others are doing the same, to see how Africa in 2025 is going to, come up with sustainable solutions. But not to forget, Beatrice, we're looking at new partnerships, how Africa is going to increase its relations with China and how that is going to shape the geopolitical space and remove that hegemony that has existed for over the years. So it's going to be an interesting dynamics. Let's see how that goes. Don't forget climate change, Beatrice. Over.
So, 𝐓𝐚𝐥𝐤, your projections for 2025?
Just to build on what David had said earlier, there is a lot of things to consider. The security perspective, from the policies and governance perspective, also the economic perspective as well. If you look at the IMF projection for 2025, the growth forecast for the continent, it's 4.2%, which is an increase from the current 3.6% in 2024. That's a huge jump, and hopefully, with economic growth increasing in that manner, if it actually turns out the projections are correct, we'll see an increase in quality of life chances, employment for youths, and the demographic dividend that is started to be on the continent can then yield many outcomes, apart from just economic benefit, but also social stability, which is very, very much tied to the ability for people to be able to put food in their stomachs and increase the quality of life. So from that perspective, it's one. And then, just like David was mentioning, the security dynamics as well, that is very, 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 very crucial. One area where other than the areas he has mentioned, we did the DRC, then the Great Lakes region. That is still a hot area on the continent. Lots of fragility in that space, and also a key part of the this new emphasis on critical and strategic minerals and how that would lead to development of new industries, right, being that region of the world, of the continent, is very rich in those minerals, and many of the projects, whether the U.S. Lobito corridor or the Tazaria, that will be leading to all of these, the mining process and export, would actually take place in a context where there's stability. But one other thing to add on the economic front is there is an increased push from the continent towards refining these natural resources as a way to increase the resource beneficiation, because the continent, of course, over decades have realized that you just cannot get the most of your resources, right, if you keep exporting. The mine to port doesn't work, and they want to see a continent where there is an emphasis on refining, and we're seeing some of that. In Nigeria, for instance, there is a 4,000-ton lithium processing mine in Niger State, which is an investment from China. We're seeing those type of investments also in Zimbabwe on lithium processing as well. So there is a positive here and there, but overwhelmingly it's still a mine to port model, and the continent is looking at how to improve and increase that, and you can hear that from all of the leaders, right, across the continent.
We will come to that in a bit, 𝐓𝐚𝐥𝐤, but let me just get an input from Dr. Adere. Your take on 2025?
Well, 2025 is going to see some continuation of what is happening today. I foresee a strong geopolitical tussle between China and the United States in Africa, for example, with Donald Trump assuming office. China-Africa relation is suddenly on the table to be improved further in 2025. Already, the leaders of the two sides have set out a very important framework for collaboration going into the new year through the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. All those ideas around investments, intercultural exchanges, industrialization, agricultural modernization, poverty alleviation and eradication demonstration centers, as well as investments in green energy. On the economic front, I foresee certain sectors attracting higher interest. For example, investments in renewable energy, the Innovation and FinTech Center, with an increasingly young and dynamic youth in Africa that is increasingly engaged and talented. I think we're going to see a more focus on investment in that area. Agriculture and health are still going to be top attractions for investment. And I think as projections for the continent's growth increases, it means that we are looking forward to additional jobs created, especially for the young people of the continent in the new year.
So, 𝐓𝐚𝐥𝐤, I want to come back to the IMF regional economic outlook that you mentioned for sub-Saharan Africa. It is projecting a modest pickup of Africa's economic growth to 4.2%, as you've alluded. Going by the challenges of 2024, which sectors do you think are going to witness this growth?
Just like the previous speaker was mentioning, the agricultural and food sector is it's one of those sectors where they've consistently been in growth. So I think that is going to continue to 2025, because of course global investors are seeing that there is a huge youth bulge on the continent, and these people need to be fed. So we're seeing a lot of investment into the agricultural sector, but also there's a lot of investment and activity even into other traditional commodity sectors as well, whether it be oil and gas, mining and mining sector for minerals, because the demand for things like bauxite or bauxite alumina, also for copper, and all of these sectors are actually experiencing huge interest from investment because of the global demand. But one other sector that I think is also seeing some growth is the services sector as well. So all of this put together, hopefully, is going to create that economic dynamism that the continent really needs. And with that dynamism, we will see an increase in quality of life of people on the continent.
So, Adera, let me come back to you on the geopolitical front. South Africa takes over the presidency of the G20. How is South Africa's, presidency, for that instance, of the G20 going to pan out? How is that going to affect Africa's voice on the global scene?
No, it's a good thing, Beatrice, that the G20 presidency is being led by South Africa for 2025. It's actually an opportunity for South Africa and Africa as a whole to harmonize their voices, especially in this platform. The G20 is the most important economic or platform for economic engagement in the world. And so with Africa getting a chance through South Africa to really put forward its priorities and desires on the table and strategically navigate the growing geopolitical tensions in a manner that can deliver tangible results for the continent, I think that is very significant. There are many areas that South Africa has already indicated that it's going to pull its weight behind in terms of investments across Africa, in terms of giving young people opportunity and skills that they need for the 21st century world. In terms of trade, opening up trade opportunities in line with the aspirations of the continental free trade area, reducing the chances of conflict in the continent. And so these are some of the priority areas that I think under the South African presidency, the African continent can galvanize a single voice and see how to attract international partnerships that can deliver on these aspirations.
David, is this the year that we are going to see more steps being made towards a new world order?
Well, I think, it's that year, we've rightly pointed out that, the new world order reflects, that level of engagement and balance and the demise of the hegemony that used to happen. And significantly, as my co-panelists have pointed out, having a country like South Africa leading the G20 could potentially be a significant, change. But it all depends on the kind of support that the other African countries, would throw behind South Africa. I believe that, Africa has always been that El Dorado that the entire universe cannot do without. And what Africa needs, is to have that collaborative and, coordination that requires in all sectors, whether you're talking about the green economy or you're talking about agriculture, infrastructure or investment. Africa stands out amongst all these other continents. But in order to realize its potential, as I mentioned earlier on, we have to be able to establish policies that, answer some of the security, stability or instability issues. Right. Talking about social stability, the political instability, geopolitical, economic stability. All these various areas must be addressed, Beatrice, and must be addressed equally. If you leave one out, what then happens is that becomes the weakest link. We have to, as a continent, realize that we can take, matters into our own hands. We can find the right partners to do business with, the likes of China. We can, use our diplomatic leverages. We can use the leverage of our population workforce. We can use the leverage of the level of natural and human resources that we have. I mean, look at the projections that IMF and the World Bank made. The African continent itself, is projected to grow above 3%. That tells you, Beatrice, that, we stand a very, very, good chance, albeit the fact that, we still have a high level of political instability as concerns, our democratic processes. So,
𝐓𝐚𝐥𝐤, I want to look at some of these unique opportunities of a multipolar world, because we have talked about de-dollarization and a multipolar world in 2024. What unique opportunities does a multipolar world present for Africa in 2025, particularly with these discussions around a BRICS currency and currency swaps?
When the BRICS is talking about global trade, and when we look at the actual project of the BRICS, they're not really trying to attack the US dollar. or create a BRICS currency, as it were. What they are really keen on is to put forward a basket of currency whereby, countries within the BRICS and even outside of the BRICS can trade. For instance, Tanzania has which is not even a BRICS member, has signed an agreement with India to trade with their local currencies. You have countries doing this all over the world. If Brazil wants to trade with Nigeria, why do we have to use the dollar to do that, right? So why should we incur transaction costs of using a third-party currency when countries can use their own currencies? And this is coming from long-term weaponization of the US dollar, which has been used many times against countries across the world. So that is why we see this enthusiasm and interest in creating an alternative system complete with tools of trade, not just even a basket of currency, but also payment mechanism, alternative to SWIFT, for instance, which is the dominant platform that is used now, so that countries are able to trade freely without fear of sanctions or their trade being impacted, political aspirations of certain countries. And that would be very key for African countries, not just African countries, but countries around the world. It's important to be able to be part of creating a more, you could say, democratic world order, whereby countries across the world are able to build their economies without fear of sanctions because of their foreign policy positions on certain issues.
Indeed, gentlemen. On that note, we're going to take a short break. When we return, we'll continue looking ahead, exploring the opportunities and the challenges that await Africa in the new year. Do stay with us. Welcome back to Talk Africa. Let's now continue with our discussion. Still with me, Dr. 𝐤𝐴𝐷𝐚𝐿, David Otto Endele, and 𝐕𝐚𝐥𝐤 𝐀𝐟𝐫𝐢. Let me now come back to you, Dr. Andere, on the outcomes of the FOCAC summit in 2024. That set the tone and the stage for China's engagement with Africa in 2025. Now, looking back at the benefits of those relations over the last decades that have yielded gains for Africa, which areas of cooperation do you think will be deepened further in 2025?
Well, certainly the relationship between China and Africa has delivered the most value for Africa compared to any other major power, for example, in the last decade. And it is set to be strengthened going into the new year, especially following the successful staging of the Forum on China-Africa Cooperation. So the key areas that the leaders from both sides have emphasized going forward is on issues, for example, on trade, significantly improving the trade between the two sides. And this is why there is a very huge push, not just by China, but also by African leaders, that the combined market of China and Africa is now standing above 2.8 billion people. That's a very big market. And so as Africa buys from China, China should be buying more also from Africa. Today, just about 20% of Africa's exports go to China, while Africa imports about 18% of its needs also from China. So I think trade is going to be a very important platform for engagement into the new year. The other issue is, of course, partnership on industrialization, especially in terms of green energy transition. I foresee a stronger collaboration between China and Africa in terms of investments in green energy, whether you're talking about mining, these critical resources that can help the world to adopt, or Africa attracting some of this technology, which, by the way, China is the surplus producer of green energy technologies. The third area, of course, is going to be in terms of skills and technology transfer. Africa is very keen on this. China has allowed increase up, I think, up to about 60,000 of young people to be trained in Chinese institutions, as well as other programs of exchanges. But Africa also expects that China will actively promote technology transfer, especially with the setting up of companies in the continent. The other issue is, of course, multilateralism, working together to offset the negative effects of unresponsive global governance systems that have for long impeded growth of Africa. So China and Africa are working together, for example, to push for reforms at the UN, to push for reforms at the World Bank and the IMF and all these other organs that are significant outputs of global financing, for example. So going into the new year, we hope to see a strategic, more stronger collaboration between China and Africa to develop their people, to provide markets for each other, and to jointly push forward common positions on global affairs.
And David, of course, Donald Trump will be back in the White House, Trump 2.0. His previous administration was characterized by policies of economic nationalism. What do you see in store for U.S.-Africa relations under Donald Trump?
To me, I don't see that there is going to be much changes. You know, this is going to still be the mantra of America first. But I think I like that, you know, to some extent, you know, because it then gives Africa, for example, the ability to look at itself, you know, and rely on its own strength. You know, I believe that, you know, the geopolitical scenery has changed significantly. I don't think, you know, President Trump-elect, you know, will be, you know, repeating what he did, you know, when he was there, you know, from 2016. I think we would see some significant changes.
Right.
Because, of course, you do have a level playing field. Beatrice, you have the likes of China that, you know, are getting increasingly engaged, you know, in balance of trade and ensuring that there is a win-win scenario between Africa and China. But also, you know, exchanges of programs that my colleague mentioned, in terms of, you know, not just experience, but technology, you know, exchange of human resource between both countries. I believe this is going to be the new world order. What we want to see significantly is the country that comes to the continent, not the continent going to the country, where individual countries that want to do business, want to have trade, want to have engagement with Africa, should come to the continent, rather than the continent going to these countries. These are some of the things which this new partnership, you know, I refer to it, you know, has been able to expose Africans to.
So, 𝐓𝐚𝐥𝐤, in terms of these partnerships, we do know that the U.S.-Africa trade flagship, the AGOA, expires in 2025. What exactly are the prospects for its renewal under Trump 2.0, and under what conditions might it be extended? Because the U.S., under Trump in his first 4 years, had a policy of inward looking.
Yes, and if there's any indication, Trump 2.0 is going to be even more nationalistic and more protectionist. So preferential trade agreements like AGOA, automatically there's a big question mark on it, and if that's actually going to be renewed. But if there's any indication from the first Trump administration, you could remember he launched the Prosper Africa Initiative, right? And the Prosper Africa Initiative was even maintained during the Biden administration, which in many ways shows from U.S. perspective, shows the effectiveness of that initiative to achieve U.S. objectives on the continent. Under that Prosper Africa Initiative, for instance, you know, over 540 deals were signed. And most of these, of course, are commercial deals. And that is very much in line with Trump's way of thinking. It's more business-oriented, more commercially driven, as opposed to, when it comes to Africa, of course, as opposed to going into things like infrastructure and building people-to-people relationships. So that narrow focus is likely to make it into the current administration. And if you combine that with his very, protectionist inclinations, which he's already demonstrating and signaling now, I think AGOA we're going to see a lot of challenge in terms of getting AGOA renewed, except Trump sees a way the U.S. is going to benefit primarily from AGOA, because he doesn't have the mentality of really going win-win I think he has demonstrated a more zero-sum approach to bilateral or multilateral engagement in this case.
So, gentlemen, we're going to wind up now, and I want to get your closing remarks as we enter the first phase of 2025. Let me start off with you, Dr. Adere. What should be the priorities for African leaders in the new year? And most importantly, are you optimistic for Africa in 2025?
Well, as an African, yes, I am optimistic for the continent. I think there is a lot of work that needs to be done, and there is enough room to see how best to do this work. So I think 2025 provides an opportunity, another year, for Africa to collaborate, for Africa to innovate, and for Africa to look inward also, to give a chance for its young people, to give a chance for its population, and deliver value and development going forward.
All right, 𝐓𝐚𝐥𝐤, your take?
Yeah, for me, I would say it's focused on governance, because most of the issues that lead to serious political changes, in the continent and even across the world, all comes down to the quality of governance. The more the leaders of the continent are able to deliver on high-quality governance, it puts us in a position to actually not even meet IMF's 4.2% growth forecast 2025, but possibly even surpass it. And also go beyond the national governance level, also the regional governance as well. Ensure that regional governance institutions are implementing everything to the latter based on what the already have agreed, whether it's at the ECOWAS level, the SADC level, the EAC, and even at the AU level. There is the Agenda 2063, like Mr. Adere mentioned. What we have there is very clear what the continent wants, and a lot of it has to do with quality of governance. And if we can achieve that within the continent and with our partners, then you see that there's a better future for the Africans. And then, of course, the global governance as well. See how we can materialize our aspirations through the G20, the AUs in G20 now. We're also at the UN level as well, get into the permanent, continue to push to get into the UN Security Council as a permanent member and improve security governance, not just in Africa, but across the world.
Indeed. David, you have the final word very briefly.
Well, Beatrice, just like my co-panelist, the fish rots from the head. And I think, the African leadership needs to understand that it has to play a very critical role. And that's in reference to the AU. That's in reference to regional bodies. That's in reference to African leaders, but totally in reference to the younger population. Africa needs social stability. It needs security stability. It needs political stability. We have a continent that's the El Dorado. That is an envy to the global economy. That's an envy to the global world. So I think we need to continuously work towards enhancing our collaboration and coordination, ensure that charity begins at home. We need a continent that exchanges free trade within its member states, a continent that allows people to travel freely. Those are some of the key areas where I believe that Africa needs to do within its own continent. But above all, Beatrice, it's a continent that needs to have a permanent seat at the United Nations Security Council. We cannot continue as a continent that only remains on the menu.
Gentlemen, thank you all very much for that, and we all look forward to an optimistic 2025 for the African continent. But that's all we have time for on this edition of Talk Africa. A big thank you to our guests, Dr. Adere 𝐤𝐿, International Relations Expert, David Otto Endele, Director, Geneva Center for Africa Security and Strategic Studies, and 𝐓𝐚𝐥𝐤, Policy Analyst at Development Reimagined. Remember, you can be a part of this conversation through our social media platforms on Facebook and X, and you can watch this and other editions of Talk Africa on our YouTube playlist. Do join us again next week for more of Talk Africa. From me, Beatrice Marshall, and the team here in Nairobi, we wish you a happy new year. Until next time, bye-bye.